So Jeremy, thanks for joining us today. And we'd just like to have probably about 20, 25 minutes of a conversation between you and I, and then we'd like to open it up to the audience. So I'd like to start out with a little bit of history. You remember we met in my office when you were a junior or senior in high school, and you had a startup idea, which I thought was very intriguing. I remember that idea. And it was one of many you had. And then you went on to college and started a company as a college student, a very successful company. So when do you think you realized that this entrepreneurship thing was kind of your gig?
I still think I'm working on it because it's one thing where I mean there's some people that say, hey, you're born and enjoy the entrepreneurial activity, but I think a lot of it, and I think back to my engineering background, which is basically you want to solve problems and you want to do so in a scale that's interesting, that moves the needle, but also finds things that is maybe more challenging for other people to find. So I've always enjoyed the tinkering part of it, and when you can find market spaces, customers, and people, and bring that together with teams and products, you can make some cool things happen. So I'm still working on it, still trying to find the craft because I think it's a lifelong pursuit.
Well, I'd like to follow up on that engineering background. We do have similar backgrounds, but yet entrepreneurship seems like such a people skill. And as you know, as an engineer, we don't learn a lot of people skills as an engineer. At least I didn't when I was there. How did you pick those up?
I mean, being a good human being, I think, is one of the best places. I mean, it is amazing what you go through an academic preparation in any form and function, and I think, as a lot of people probably realize, it's not, you can't do it alone. You have a whole support system behind you. You have faculty, you have staff, you have fellow students, you have friends. I mean, you just have a whole ecosystem of people to draw on. And my dad is an engineer by background. My mom was a teacher. So that if there's anything in entrepreneurship that's to be taken, I think it is still a people aspect. It's still a people game. Because you are constantly trying to find things that others can't find. You're trying to do things that are hard. And as much as I think of my background as being in technology companies, if you look at how people expend resources in any startup, in any company, whether it's big or small, probably, unless you're a very heavy manufacturing company, it's going to be mostly people. Mm-hmm. And so the way in which to work together, fundamentally you have to think about that. And so the human dynamics is that's a real thing. I mean, you have to ship product too, but the human stuff's the harder part, mm-hmm. and the more interesting part in my mind.
No, it's a very interesting observation. In fact, when my students, when Dyn was just going all out, every student I had in class kept saying, I want to work for Dyn, I want to work for Dyn. And then you hosted a bunch of different students. You had some of our interns.
Yep.
So I think it's kind of a testament to what you just said. It's developing the people skills that are really important.
Yeah, and for us, I mean, and hey, that's a very selfish thing also, because as much as you guys said, hey, come on out. I mean, first off, thank you for creating the Rhines Fund, because I was trying to figure out what kind of percentage of the Rhines Fund students that we've had that have worked for us or worked on projects for us, and it's like, that's a pretty decent percentage. And so obviously a testament to the grilling that you guys put them through and the hard work that they put in. But it's building that talent pipeline is such an important thing, and is one that I think a lot of companies have forgotten how to do, where they expect a fully trained workforce to show up. I mean, it's more of a soapboxy type of thing, but it's companies have some responsibility in training their workforce as well. And so being able to learn from students, and I was talking with President Dean as we're walking in, like, this is like the best part, like being able to hear from students and like what kind of things that they're thinking about, the questions that they ask, the way that they look at the world, because it's if anyone can agree on something, it's like the world is changing, and being able to be dynamic, to keep up with it, you need multiple perspectives from all sorts of walks to be able to see where that could go. And so it is so important to build that pipeline. I'm glad that we were a magnet for good talent, and we continue to think about, like, how do we keep that going?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a very symbiotic relationship, though, for us, because for us it's just so exciting for our students to be able to go out into what they term the real world. And so if we could provide that to businesses and help them along, I think that's what one of the major roles of a university is, especially a state university.
I mean, I love the research side, but I've always been a practitioner. So I mean, you need fundamental research in order to push things along. And in our background, it was a lot of the internet, and that was all fundamental research. It was military work. It was NSF, and it took so long. We're still trying to figure out these innovations from what you can do with the internet, of technology and things that UCLA and University of Maryland and people here. I mean, UNH has had a role to play in the growth of the fundamentals of what we consider the internet today, and we're still unpacking value from that. I mean, it's pretty awesome, and it's fun to be a part of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. As President Dean said, as an R1 research university, that's really the foundation for all of this, and it's the same thing that you have to do in industry too. Yeah,
is try to take those insights and then try to bring them to a different scale. And so that responsibility is very much and research, I think, gets forgotten a lot. It's not as fun. It's maybe not as interesting. I was hanging out with some engineering people, some former colleagues, and we're talking about some of the. There's some protocol changes that are going on in the internet, and if not but for really great universities that have an interest in this, some of the people who are working on some of these new protocol elements, they're either going to be done in corporate environments where they might have a particular bias, or they might get done in a pursuit of knowledge. And I think that there should be a balance there. All of our knowledge should not come from industry, and it doesn't. There's fundamental research that needs to be done elsewhere.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. I mean, research is heavy lifting. It's a lot of work. Yeah. I'd like to switch a little bit. You've raised an extremely successful company in Dine, went to a successful exit. What were some of the key times when you said, wow, I'm really onto something. This really may be what I dreamed it's going to be. Or maybe you didn't dream it was going to be that.
Yeah, we always had a 2-year plan, and so the 2-year plan kind of kept moving, where every time you look at it, there's more pages to the plan, or there's more things to the plan. I'd say that there were, for benefit, there's kind of the origin story. I was a student at WPI, where I went to university, and it was computer networking was just like this new phenomenon, and so we were trying to print lab papers out and couldn't do it. It was cold out and new network campus, and for whatever reason, the printers the lab that we were in was configured like 2 buildings down. Oh my goodness, that's a long way to go, and it's cold out, and really don't want to finish this paper. So how about we work on something different? So we worked on this technology that allowed for basically what we would think of as remote access, or the fundamentals of what Dyn became, which is around internet routing, dynamic DNS, and part of the core protocols. So we wrote this addressing technology that allowed you to be on this lab computer, print to this thing that was over there. And like that at the time was pretty novel. I mean, there were, you could set this stuff up, but it wasn't easy. And so we made this stuff very human consumable and became an open source project. Kind of one thing led to the next. We had a lot of people that were using it. And we said, oh my goodness, why are so many people using this? We want to shut it down. We didn't want to shut it down because, well, that was kind of a mean thing to do because they were using this. They found utility. So we came up with this moral dilemma where we basically said, hey, you users out there, if you on average give us $1, there's 25,000 people out there, we keep running the service. I thought, oh, okay, well, if we shut it off, we'll feel good about this. And sent out the message to all the users that were on the service, and kind of one thing led to the next, and $40,000 shows up, which to a sophomore in school, I mean, you guys know, that's an astronomical sum of money. and said, it was colorful language, and we said, well, we're on the hook. We have something to do here. And so that was one of the first turning points, and I really think it goes to that customer discovery that's really important. And when you hear something, and sometimes it takes getting hit over the head to have those pivots to say, wow, we're onto something. So that was clearly one. And then the next time, and shows that I'm still a student of this activity. Fast forward, that was 2001. So fast forward to about 2007, 2008, we noticed that there were these interesting companies that were using our service in these very particular ways. And there were some of the Twitters and Pandoras and Netflixes. And at the time, there were these small companies and nobody cared about them. And so we asked them, what would you want more from the service that we're offering? And they mentioned this, they mentioned that, and they're like, wow, we're getting so much value because we're saving hundreds of thousands of dollars from not buying these services instead. And there was a Fortune 500 energy company that was using our service, and our contact worked for the CFO of this company. So, I mean, they're buying oil rigs, they're buying land, like hundreds of thousands of acres, and they're doing a lot of really expensive things. And they said, the only suggestion I have is it's really hard to justify a $30 PO to my CFO when he's used to buying $100 million oil rigs. So you may want to think about the pricing of your service. and again, as the engineer, like, well, it only costs $30 to deliver, and we're still making a lot of money on it. So, but it got us thinking a lot about the nature of what was happening at that time, which was the public cloud, the hybrid cloud, and we started moving in that direction. That was really a huge wave of growth for us. So you get signal from all sorts of places, but honestly, it's so easy to tell the story in reverse when you're like staring at the facts and you're like, there's like noise over here, there's noise over here, and there's noise over here. And so I think it is, going back to the people aspect, it is a team that you really need to have in order to kind of filter through what's the signal and what's the noise.
So all those signals and all those changes, and so how did you keep the culture alive through all that? And because you were adding people very rapidly, I would assume.
Yeah, and it changed. Like that, and change isn't necessarily a bad thing in culture. We had actually one of the things that we had thought about from the culture aspect of like how can we continue to be this beacon of like an interesting place to be. And New Hampshire, I think, has a much better reputation, and there's a lot more interesting companies that are around here. So it's like I don't want to. It was really dark in probably the mid-2000s. If you were a technology company and you were saying, hey, like you should be a cool technology person here. Like, I mean, a lot of people said no. A lot of people went away. And that's changed. And we see that in net migration. We see that in student groups like this. And I mean, there's so much more to be liked. But that was one of the reasons why we were hyper-focused on talent pipeline and being able to grow and expand. Because if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be able to survive. So we entered this competition that we saw the best companies to work for, and it was kind of a joke after a while because we thought we just had a very different way of thinking about it, and we knew that if we were 10 people and we were well recognized, and when we were 100 people, that our culture would be different. We didn't know how, and there's things you can do when you're 10 people that you can't do when you're 100. There's things you can do when you're 100 people that you can't do when you're 10. But we celebrated. We had values, and we thought about our people, and it was a very 24/7 environment. So our team really mattered, and it was really stressful because, like, if our stuff broke, like you would read about it, and, that
which we did.
You guys did get to read about it every once in a while. Not every day was a good day, but that gave us a way where we could think of how to be different but equal in the sense of treating our employees and our staff as part of us. And I mean, I remember so many like financial advisors and other people that come in and be like, well, you can set up these benefit packages, and you as the owners, like you can do so much better over here. Like, no, we're not interested in that. And so when we set up our benefits package, for example, or our 401k, like it was the same stuff that I would get. And again, I think the world has changed. It's a bit more. It's not egalitarian, but giving opportunity for everyone was really important for us, whether they were a frontline support person or whether they were a senior engineer. It mattered a lot to make sure that the cultural aspect of what we wanted to celebrate was consistent. And you can be really good culture and celebrate one thing, and really good culture and celebrate a completely different thing. But it meant a lot to us.
Well, it makes sense because we always try to the Rhinesfeld they have to feel ownership, and then they'll do anything.
Yeah, it's probably a great tenet for you guys. The ownership of being able to do all those things on your own.
Right, and it sounds similar to And then I was thinking, so you have these people, this culture, and they really feel ownership to a certain extent, both actually and emotionally to Dyn. And then you had this huge, which I don't know what you call it, but when you had the hit, and was it 2/3 of the websites in the United States went down, or something absurd like
Who
that?
Who knows?
Something.
A lot. Too many.
So how did that go? I mean, you could laugh about it now, and I could laugh about it now, but do you think that culture helped you do that? That's a huge bump for you guys.
Yeah, because everyone can say that they have a great culture, and until something really bad happens,
exactly.
like you don't know. And then when those days happen, like you actually find out where you stand. And in case anyone's wondering, it was October 21st, 2016. It started at about 7 o'clock, 7:06 to be specific in the morning. I was actually going to an event, and my phone blew up in a way that did not. I had my phone. The phone crashed because I was just getting so many text messages. And so I made a quick couple of phone calls and I found out, oh, that's not good. And it was funny because I saw a couple of people afterwards and they said, this whole thing was going on. You were just sitting there and you were cool as a cucumber. Like, faith in the team, faith in the team, faith in the team. And I, after that event, I there was more work to be done. But we had a lesson that had taught me about like being a good citizen. Like we had competitors, for example, and like some people have a winner-take-all, kick down, kick up type mentality, and it don't work. It does not. Like you have to. The world is too small, and there's only so many people in our community, and I think it's true in a lot of communities that would actually do internet stuff. And so we had learned a lesson because I had gotten kind of quoted out of context, beating up on a competitor in an unfair way. This was 2009, and I still remember the story, and I still remember the reporter who did this, and it took us a while to have a normal relationship because of like that. That was not who we were. We were not a person that would want to, like, they had a bad day, and there was a news story, and I got quoted in it, and I felt really bad about it. And so on that day where the Mirai botnet took out a large percentage of the internet, we had a lot of goodwill from all walks. Our customers were, they didn't like their sites being down, but they were helpful. We had competitors who helped and would take on some of the load, and they were helping do some of the security things that were able to filter some of the bad things that were taking place. We had some of our favorite customers. We had a customer advisory board, and literally they would call up local restaurants, and they were sending food. They were ordering, like, just go send like 10 pizzas over to these guys because I know that they're just like slogging it out. And people were there probably 36 hours after the event, through basically the end of Saturday, and had been at a keyboard nonstop for that period of time. And because of those type of events, you can go back and say, hey, the culture we built, that was a very enduring environment. And the mission to what we were doing, which was essentially, hey, uptime was really important for us, and we were trying to make sure that people and content and commerce could all connect on a global internet. That was what people were thinking about that day, and it was really cool to see. It's fun. It's almost fun to laugh about now, 3 years later. still a little like.
But it's got to give you some solace to know that the culture actually did kick it. It did work.
It's great.
So whatever you're doing right, that's the next one. You have to do the same thing.
And on the next one, you do stuff differently, and that's you want to experiment, you want to grow, and you also want to make sure that your mission and the culture, they overlap. So that's important.
Could you tell us a little bit about the new startup?
New startup. So there was that fateful day in October, and it got me thinking a lot about a deficiency that exists, which basically the internet is growing in the home. That's where a lot of the internet growth is. Lots of connected devices, lots of bandwidth, and it's still managed the same way. And if you've ever had a frustration in buying some sort of internet-connected device and trying to connect it at home, you're not alone. There's a lot of other people that are having that same problem. And so it got us thinking about how does the internet grow in the home environment, but do so in a way that's well managed. And so we thought it was going to be a security thing. Even in 2 years it's changed. We thought it was going to be just this security layer that's going to go into the home that internet service providers would deploy to make these Mirai botnets go away. Turns out that there's still there's this Maslow, we came up with this Maslow's hierarchy of internet needs. And so basic connectivity.
That's President Dean's area. That's not mine.
Yeah, so you can imagine. Who wanted to relate it to somebody? So there's basic connectivity at the most basic principle. Like if you're either on or off. You can think about it as water. Like the water needs to flow. And then it's like, okay, so now I have enough water, and it's reliable. Now I want the water to be safe. Like, it should be safe as drinking water, and should always be clean. And so there's like this hierarchy, and so I think we're still kind of somewhere between this first and second layer of connectivity demands of, regardless of where you are in the home, and regardless of what device it is, it has enough data, has enough throughput to be able to work. And we're still working on that. I think that's still kind of a challenge for a lot of internet operators. And then it's like, how do you make it easy to use? And then it's the security aspects. And so we're an IoT security and Wi-Fi management platform that service providers can use to make their offering better, because they used to have this very defined line of, this is the homeowner, and this is my stuff. And now it's becoming more fuzzy. Like, where does the network that the service operator provides, like, where does that end? Does it end here? Does it end here? So you need this sense of shared management, and so we're building a bunch of product around that idea.
Well, that would be interesting to follow.
We're very excited to follow it, too.
I'm sure you are.
It's still early, so that's why it's a startup.
But we expected to see, like Diane, always getting elected as the best company to work for.
We're still waiting.
So we're not putting the pressure on you.
No, please don't.
So you're in a unique position now. There's a bunch of technology trends, innovations. You're in the trenches, as we say. You're looking ahead. You've been doing that all your life. What do you think is the biggest impact that's coming around, and how do you think some of these students in here could prepare for that? Both to take advantage of it or to not get killed by it.
Yeah, so there is so much change going on. So it's a target-rich environment for anything interesting out there. I mean, regardless of whether, and just thinking of some of the students I was talking to, whether it's in energy, whether it's in biochemistry, whether it's in medical, whether it's in just IT, whether it's in higher ed. I mean, the world is completely changing. Which is pretty cool. If you're a student coming out, you have access to so much information, content, people that you 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I mean, it's just astronomical how different it is. And probably the biggest thing I have is like this unique insight or this interesting insight is that the person who came up with a Netscape web browser. Mark Andreessen, he started this venture capitalist firm, and their whole motto is around software's eating the world. And I think a more interesting way to think about, well, what does that mean, or how does that impact daily life is around this concept that, there's still web tools to be, there's a Salesforce that exists, and like it's all web-based, and it's all information, Slack. But the much more interesting businesses are these intersections of the hard world and I don't want to say data or IT or software, but they're not easy businesses. They're ones that are much more complicated and nuanced. And so you think about some of the bio companies, and they're still doing bio stuff, but they're IT and analytic driven. I think about what we're doing, and we're dealing with RF antennas and IT stuff. So, and you think about some of the, again, going back to kind of the research side, like it's going to touch the physical world. There's a lot going on in the built environment about how buildings are engineered or how cities are engineered. There's a lot of really cool stuff out there, and it's going to take these really interesting interdisciplinary skills from multiple fields to drive really cool ideas. And the ones that are able to kind of understand those feedback loops, they're going to do really well. You think about Uber, for example. I mean, let alone the politics of kind of that company, but or Lyft of driving cars. There's a regulatory aspect that's really fascinating. There's how do you deal with a workforce on demand that's different. You're dealing with routing algorithms of cars and traffic in urban areas. Like, it's a fascinating business. PillPack, another one, where you could just imagine that's an e-commerce store, but like they have a lot of logistical challenges and like the whole back end of insurance and billing for pharmaceuticals, like that's complicated stuff. Those are going to be the interesting businesses to start and to be part of and to help grow, because those are the ones that are going to make a difference. And the ones that are like these standalone, like just some small wedge of the value chain, they'll probably be successful too. But I think the more disruptive players are going to be these ones that can mix experience, data, a given field. Like those are the ones that are going to be interesting.
So more like a holistic approach.
Yeah, I think so.
It's funny you mentioned PillPack, because we did not get in on that deal. But who knows? We'll see.
Everybody needs an anti-portfolio.
That's exactly right. But when you mentioned Mark Andreessen, the Netscape, that was really the first browser, I believe, wasn't it? And then
Mosaic, but yeah.
Oh, Mosaic was before
Yeah.
that, right?
And before that, it was Elm, and anyway, yeah.
Well, I could say it's before my time, but that's not true. But I don't remember. But I don't remember Elm, but I do remember Mosaic.
So does that's what the Wikipedia page says, right? I mean, we just read about it.
But some of us lived it, unfortunately. But that's Andreessen Horowitz now. They turned venture capital.
Yeah.
So you're dabbling in the investment field also, correct?
Yeah.
You want to kind of maybe elucidate a little bit of what you look for?
Interesting people, interesting founders. We've been doing angel investing for probably about 10 years now.
That's what I thought. Right?
I would say there's plenty of good stuff in the anti-portfolio as well. For me, it was a way when I was at Dine, super focused in one space. It was a way to get telemetry about other industries, and I think I started because there was a next generation point of sale system. Didn't work out, but there's this company called Toast. They're doing pretty well, so they missed the mark. And you can't get them all right? And the other thing I found interesting was that companies that were doing something interesting on the Dine platform, we wanted to watch those, and so I got into some of those type of companies. But it's interesting people. We have obviously an interest in internet infrastructure stuff, and think there's something that we know about that. And security is another one. IT security, that's another one. Workforce development, and higher ed is something that I think that is interesting, although it's a hard business. Your president actually wrote a very interesting book. We got to feature at our bookstore about how to work with educational institutions, which I'd highly recommend. I'm about halfway through, President. It's been very cool to read so far. So thank you for being able to craft it, because I think that's an area where, again, industry and higher ed haven't found the right ways to continue to work together. I think it's still very much a early 1900s view, and there's room for innovation there. But all said, it's been about 50 companies. Probably the most interesting, most successful one is Desktop Metal, which is a 3D printing company. It was a gentleman who was on my board at Dine, and they're doing pretty well. But some materials, but it's it's a people thing, right?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned, because I'm going to brag more about my students. We have somebody at Toast.
Oh yeah,
and she loves it there.
Yeah,
and all she does is on the phone though has to explain that it's not a breakfast place.
Yeah, the marketing people.
That was a bad
they
thing.
hired that later, so.
So we've got we're going to turn this over to questions to the audience. We've got some people on the microphones. Hello. Thank you. And then I'll let them grab people from the audience and answer questions. I know some of you have to leave. So I'd like to just open up the questions. We'll have people coming down both aisles, and just raise your hand, and we'll be glad to pass the mic.
Especially from students, because it's a way that I keep current. I don't know what happens out in the world, except...
Yep. In the back?
You mentioned how difficult workforce development is. Speaking of workforce development, how are you handling the challenges of populating your own workforce?
I show up at things like this, get to know students early, and then hopefully we're hiring. So anyone wants come on up and say hi.
He's approached quite a few of mine, I can tell you right now. But he waits.
Why do you think I'm here? This is a recruitment trip for me. No, in all seriousness, it's full employment, which means that workers and employers get a lot of choice both ways, and. You do all sorts of types of things to be able to meet people, be able to meet prospective workforce. I think you have to be a bit more creative about the people that you're able to accept in your doors. Where before, I'm gonna post a position for a unicorn, and you hope you get it, but sometimes you have to be more flexible about what kind of job requirements that you have. And I think a lot of times employers will set their bar too high. But like anything, it's, what's the number one source that any employer has for new workers? It's going to be the current workforce. And so we think a lot about how to engage our employees in what are the types of things that we're looking for, and also different ways of meeting those needs. So if somebody that we have in our workforce, maybe they know a person that, everybody wants a UX designer, right? Like that's in IT, like that's a unicorn because they're all employed. But one of the things you can do is you can find people who have those skills in your own workforce, train them at that, get them better at that, and then you can backfill them with somebody that's maybe a little bit easier to find. So we do a lot of that kind of pipelining, cross-skill training. It takes a lot longer. I mean, we have to think a lot about where our workforce needs are going to be, even as a startup that's 30 people, because that's the only way that we can be competitive and compete. Not with companies that are just in the area, but West Coast companies in Europe, companies in Asia. I mean, it's a global marketplace for us.
Down here? You got him, Darren?
Hi, I imagine your 5th employee is very different from your 100th employee. So what are the dynamics of retention when you start getting into a bigger and bigger company?
Yeah, sometimes retention is like a double-edged sword. Sometimes you want retention, sometimes you don't want retention. We had a dinner for our tenured employees one time, our 5-year and tenured employees, and one of the things, and I will hopefully be polite to college students. There's the risk of promoting somebody every 2 years, right? And typically, then all of a sudden they're managing people and whatever else. And at this dinner, I was kind of looking around the audience and realized, wait a second, all these people manage people at one point. And the people that were here were no longer managing people. And so we had gotten into this trap of promoting people, the typical Peter principle. You promote somebody to their level of incompetence, and the people who had figured out how to get out of that management position, they were the ones that were successful, as an example. And so in a fast-growth company, I think one of the things that you typically do is you're like, well, you've been here for 3 years. You must know a lot of stuff. We're going to make you in charge of a bunch of people. And that might not be what they want to do. And so I think one of the things that we got really good at was realizing and respecting that an employee may want to stay in the same role that they're in. And there's somebody that's still there. We hired in 2005, Jason Hutchins. Love that guy. And he is a support guy. He's a support technician. I mean, he's like a level 3 support technician. I mean, he can solve any bizarro question on internet, anything. But he loves just doing support stuff. And he became known as the Donut Viking because, culturally, he was such an important fixture. And he'd go around with this hat and a cape eventually, and his costume got more and more elaborate as the years went on. And I remember having this conversation with some of the HR people, and I thought that this was a really wacky and bizarre thing, but also it was something to kind of continue to ground us in who we were. And so they wanted to promote this person, we should make this guy a fellow, and we should do this and that. And some of those things were true about putting that person in a position where they had a way that they could become a deeper practitioner of their craft and not necessarily a general who managed a lot of people. And in an engineering company, that's one of the things, and a software company, that's one of the things you think about is how do you make sure that you have a senior engineer or a technology fellow or somebody who has a bit more maybe autonomy or can provide some of that mentorship. And then the people who are just don't like being in a big system, sometimes you just have to say you've been a great person, but there's more guidelines, more rules in a bigger organization. And so sometimes they have to go somewhere else. And you just have, again, it's like being a human thing, and as long as you're not a jerk about it, it's usually the best for the employee and the employer. Don't feel like you need to get promoted all the time.
That's an excellent point, actually, because a person can still get financially compensated. They don't need a title.
Yeah.
And many people are very happy that way.
Yeah.
Oh, Darren? Or where are we?
So one of the things you mentioned repeatedly was culture, and we kind of just addressed that. an ancillary part of your previous answer, but you also mentioned how there's not one correct culture, that there's tons of different winning cultures. Are there facets, though, that you would say are prerequisite to a winning culture? Are there things you've identified as you have to have this?
You probably want a workforce that's based on trust and respect. There's maybe examples where that's not the case. Treating people, like we always thought of treating people well and having some type of ownership mentality over things was important. One of the things that kind of gave me that comment was Netflix is another company that's very much known for its culture, and they have a culture deck. One of the things that they celebrate, though, is not to say that you can't be a team member or a team player inside of Netflix, but one of the things that they support are A players and alpha players specifically. And so they like the very best person at the very best thing and kind of at the detriment to the team. And so, using a sports analogy, because I think it is kind of illustrative to use, and I'm not a big sports person, but it's fun to use. You look at the Patriots, and any of those players on another team is not your top player necessarily somewhere else, but as a system, they crush everybody. And that was more of our philosophy, and Netflix was maybe a different philosophy where they had a lot of kind of more eminent domain experts in their one specific area, where maybe as a team they couldn't perform. It was just different. But it's still an attention to people. I think that's a fundamental aspect, and cultures can celebrate team wins or individual wins, and being super deliberate about what types of things you're reinforcing with your culture actually becomes as much an art and a science. But I think just being able to say this culture's good, this culture's bad. Where cultures are bad is where the company mission and the incentive structures are disaligned. Where, hey, we want to get customers, and so making fun of customers, for example, might be one of the things that is misaligned, even though it might be interesting and fun for employees to kind of get in on. And so there are commonalities, but it's really making sure you treat your workforce well, making sure you treat customers very well, making sure you pay attention to your stakeholders. There's certainly a lot written on having a great culture. And I don't think there's been a lot that unpacks what are the next layers down about what are good cultures. But don't have misaligned incentives. That's probably the worst one. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Just had a quick question about in the early days during your initial due diligence, what was your process like for testing the idea and seeing if this is something that people would be interested in?
And anything that you'd imagine. Customers were probably the best place. It's amazing how much time you can have a bunch of really smart, talented employees sitting around a room having all sorts of crazy ideas and fighting over which ones are better, which ones back and forth, and then going to an actual prospect and saying, hey, what would you think if we offered this? And they're super divergent sometimes. And so we were always a big fan of getting customer feedback and customer engagement in new ideas. There is the Steve Jobsonian approach to, well, I'm just going to design an iPhone and it's going to be awesome. But, not to burst the bubble, but Apple's a fast follower in their strategy. There are things that they do which are in fact new, but iPod, there was the creative MP3 player beforehand, they better executed it. There was a smartphone. I remember having a Trio in 2004. It was a fine phone. iPhone was a lot better. Second generation was a lot better. The iPad, it's kind of a mixed bag of. So anyway, the fast followers I think do very well. That's a strategy that I love. I don't like we're going to be disruptively innovative. I think it's you find signal. You find somebody who is actually making a lot of market noise. Because it's so expensive to actually create a new market, typically you can out-execute somebody. And if you're just faster, nimbler, better at it, you'll win. And you don't have to have, you don't take the risk of being the most intelligent, genius person to get something right.
We talk about that in class with the fast first mover advantage, and we say, all you're really doing is maybe building somebody else's prototype.
Oh, yeah, and doing all their marketing for them.
Exactly. And,
So thank you.
And doing a proof of concept and move right in. So when we look at different investments, they all seem nice, as you know, and it's always, well, what is that market really like? And
Yeah.
I think that's an important part of some of the work that we do.
Yeah.
There was another question?
Yeah,
Somebody has a
so
microphone somewhere down here, right? Yep, okay.
as somebody who is a UX designer and who is pretty close to the products that I help build and design, I often find myself trying to put my bias aside, knowing like deep down the data and things like that. How do you put your bias aside when you're trying to figure out what your customers and users really want?
It's having perspective. So and not letting I guess I believe in data-informed decisions, not necessarily data-driven decisions. I mean, I don't want to get too nuanced on the word choices, but a lot of times you can like I think Google sometimes will suffer from this as an example. They had this whole thing about the shade of blue that they were going to use for their link color one time. And they did a bunch of testing on click-through rates and whatever, and they're trying to optimize something based on the shade of blue, and they tried out these 40 shades of blue, and they let the data make the decision for them rather than finding out that a cultural norm for a blue hyperlink had already been set, and like, well, yes, they could trigger a slightly better behavior by doing something else. They eventually decided to do what they probably should have done. And so being close to the data gives you really great insights about conclusions that are not necessarily closely held yet, or that are not like conventional wisdom. But the way I think you also get freedom from and better insight is having different perspectives around the data set. So, I mean, somebody has to be informed about the data set, but like we have a designer who is a super edgy, they're based in Brooklyn, like very progressive design methodology, and like data-driven. And then we have someone who's kind of the opposite, like a very stodgy, sterile, but well executed, well professional UX. And you get the two of them to talk to each other, and you get them to compromise about what types of things to do. And so that way you do get that benefit of that healthy tension about which way to go, so that you are data informed about the outcome and not surrendering to it. Because a lot of times when you actually design the experiment, sometimes you design the experiment completely wrong. And not that you don't, it's the things that you don't know, those are the ones that kill you, because you don't design the experiment with taking those factors. And those factors might trump everything. And like in that Google example, that's what happened with them, is that, well, the rest of the world decided that the hyperlink color had already been settled, and like Google wanted to, they had a slightly better click-through rate and would have increased revenue by a certain amount for a certain period of time, but it would have backfired on them. So they eventually reversed what they were doing. Again, it's you can't. I think everyone likes AI and ML because like, oh, all these intelligent computers are going to tell us what to do, and like they're going to give us some pretty interesting insights, but we're not going to understand them. And it's going to be a human that's going to have to turn that into practice. And just like we're talking about people and culture, it might make sense, but people are not rational human. No, we are not all rational. We're consumer behavioralist entities. So don't get too. The data might say one thing, but I don't know. Always follow your gut.
Jessica, you got it, Darren?
You spoke a little bit to the vastness of the internet, but I think with any market, there's a certain level of saturation. Can you speak either on, your personal endeavor side, your angel investing experience, on any strategies you might use to identify the extent of saturation in the market?
Market trends are interesting because you want to go where there's tailwinds, but just because there's not tailwinds doesn't mean there's not opportunity. You think about overfished in ponds, and you think in underfished in ponds, and that gives you an interesting insight into where you can find opportunity. So like on the internet trend, for example, there'll be more people that will have high-speed internet in North America next year than there will be this year, but the percent growth is not as good. So it means, where else do you look? Well, one of the places you're going to look is emerging markets. And so we're a more international business as a result. So that's one of the things that we think about calibrating. I remember the person who started Carbonite, I think David Friend, and he talked about starting a company called eFax in the 1990s. So this was like when in the early 2000s, and he was giving a story about how this company, like faxes were going down, right? Everybody was starting to use email and digital documents and whatever else. And what he had found is everybody retreated out of fax machines faster than the market was allowing for people to actually get out of it. And so it was like, huge opportunity. There's all these, I used to have there used to be 10 competitors fighting over $10. Now there's like one competitor that's fighting over $10. So if I'm in that pool, I'm going to get 8. And that's what he did. And he was really successful at it. So you look at market trends, but the market analysts, they don't get paid on how successful they are on those trends. Again, you have to think about what are the places where opportunities are going to happen, and not all of them are as obvious as others. So I guess I would never start or get out of the business just because a market research thing said, this is going to go away. Again, it's like, trust your gut.
So our time is up now, Jeremy. So I want to thank you very much for that. Our next panel will start right away, but thank you again, Jeremy.
Thanks so much, guys.